So what's the lifetime?
All right. You all should be set to go. All right. So, like I said earlier, this is our new unit, or new module. We're going to be talking about energy. We'll talk about different cycles, as in like hydrologic, nitrogen, carbon cycle. We'll talk about climate change, as well as some different calculations for these energy, like movements of energy. But before we get started, there we go. I just wanted to clarify a couple things. So while I was grading your M1 Gold, I realized there were a couple like misconceptions or like not full understandings. So nutrients do not grow. They're literally like not living. They're things like salt or oxygen. So they accumulate, they don't grow. Things like plankton or smaller living organisms actually do grow. So I just wanted to clarify that nutrients are not living things. They're just molecules that can be utilized by organisms. The second thing is that adding water does not decrease the amount of salt. It decreases the concentration of salt that's already there. So it's not like when you add the water, say like with the glacier, right? When it melts, you're not taking the salt out of the water. You're just adding more liquid, which means it decreases the concentration of it, not the actual amount of salt that's in the water. So I just wanted to like clarify that. So concentration is the comparison of like how much stuff is dissolved in how much liquid. And then I had a question about why are bogs acidic. I didn't know, so I looked it up, and it's actually kind of cool. So there's a super low level of oxygen that's present. And there's very cold temperatures, which means that fungi and bacteria can't decompose things. And as we saw from our lab, I think the fridge had the least amount of decomposition, like across the board, like when compared to the classroom light or in the the desk back there. And that's because they in bogs you can't actually decompose any plants very quickly. And so this actually forms something called peat, which is a mixture of partially decomposed plant matter. It resembles soil, but it's super acidic, so you usually mix it in with soil to when you're using it for plants. Could someone read the objectives for me, please? Thanks, Brandon.
Describe the process of photosynthesis and respiration. Distinguish among the trophic levels that exist in food chains and food webs.
So those are the two things that we'll be talking about today. Does anyone remember what the relationship between photosynthesis and cellular respiration is? I know this is like taking you back to like bio freshman year. What's a relationship? Yeah, I got it. Okay, yeah, they are both interlinked. Cellular respiration is actually completed by all living organisms. Photosynthesis are the ones that the organisms that actually use sunlight. Does anyone else know what the relationship is? I think it's super cool that this occurred. Anyone know? What's the relationship between photosynthesis and cellular respiration? Yeah.
Doesn't one lead to the other?
Very close, yeah. So they're actually opposites of each other. Yeah. So we'll see in like the next two slides, but they're actually opposite processes. And you'll see with the equations, like what goes in and what comes out versus like for both of them. So as a reminder, right, photosynthesis is performed by plants, algae, and even some bacteria are actually photosynthetic. And it uses solar energy to convert matter. So it uses that energy to actually make our glucose, right? So we have solar energy plus water plus CO2, and that gets us our glucose, which is our high energy molecule, and oxygen. Okay. So there's a whole complex process of like actually doing photosynthesis within the leaves, but this is just the general overall equation showing you that it's taking sunlight and turning it into sugar.
Make the right hand number. All I know is that it's like, you know?
I know it's kind of hard to type the equation. Alright, is there any more time on the slide?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay, got it. Thank you.
So plants are really important, right? Because they create the oxygen that we need to breathe. And they also use that CO2 that we exhale.
Wait. I gotta practice it. That's spooky part.
It's okay, I'm gonna move on.
Yeah, miss.
Yeah.
So cellular respiration uses that glucose that's made and releases the energy that's needed to live, to grow, and even reproduce. So the equation is actually the exact opposite. So you have your glucose plus your oxygen, which are the products of photosynthesis. And that ends up being split into water, CO2, and then you use that energy that's formed when those bonds break as the energy to either do lots of different metabolic functions. But all organisms do cellular respiration. All living things have to, in order to actually access the energy that's stored within glucose. Questions about photosynthesis or cellular respiration? This should be familiar, at least. Like, you should have heard these terms before. So, now we're going to talk about trophic levels, which are another way to say energy levels. So, energy that's captured by producers moves through a lot of different trophic levels depending on what consumes what. Now, a big...
Diana Perez to the front office.
Another thing to remember, and really important, is that energy is lost at every single level. So our system is not that efficient. So heat is lost. Energy generally, when you lose it, is lost as heat. And then decomposers aren't technically like within the trophic pyramid, but they are a part of it, which is why they're on the side in like that orangish color, because they recycle the nutrients for the producers so that they can continue to grow and reproduce. And each one of the levels, so you have primary producers on the bottom, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, and then apex predators. They're also sometimes called quaternary consumers. And we'll go into like each level of that a little bit on the next slide. Yeah.
Does that mean like the ones at the top have to eat more?
Yeah. Right. So it makes sense. Like I'll explain more of how that works when we get to like the energy transfer. But yeah, generally the ones at the top, like the organisms at the top, need to eat more of their like energy source than like the consumer, like the primary consumers need. All right. So our levels, these are just two different food chains. They're very simplified just to give you an idea of how this functions. So producers, they are ground level or level 0. Those are things like grasses or different plants when you're talking about terrestrial. Then you get up to your primary consumers, which are like zebra, so they're vegetarians, right? They eat only plants. And then you have your secondary consumers, which are your lions or hyenas, right? Which eat the zebra, eat the antelope, as you saw, if you've seen like The Lion King.
Yes.
You've seen this, you've seen this food chain before. Now on the other side, when you're talking about aquatic, so you have things like algae, which are your photosynthetic algae, which means that they make their own food, right? They make their glucose from the sun's energy. You have your zooplankton, which are your primary consumers because they eat the algae. The fish then eat the zooplankton, and so you get your secondary consumers. And then your birds, like a bald eagle, eat the fish, and so that gets you up to the tertiary consumer because they're the third level of consumer. Now, if you had like something that was a predator for something like a bald eagle, you'd end up getting up to here with the quaternary consumer. Okay. Questions about this food chain or the different levels? Like what each one does. So there's a couple special helpful organisms that are a part of the trophic levels, but I just wanted to highlight. So one is scavengers. So these are organisms like coyotes. They're really good scavengers. So they pretty much consume everything that's like left over from other more specialized organisms like bobcats. They'll like eat the bones and leftovers of whatever the bobcat ate for lunch. They'll also eat like roadkill, right? If the squirrel gets run over, they'll eat it. And then you have things like detritivores. So those consume detritus, which is also known as dead plant matter. So those are things like worms, insects, mushrooms. Some mushrooms do like consume that plant matter. And then you have your decomposers, which are the organisms that break down organic molecules into their small constituent parts. And those are mostly like mushrooms and bacteria that do that, which is pretty cool. Mushrooms are awesome. They're so cool. They're super helpful too. Yeah. So this is a simplified food web. I just wanted to give you an example of all of the like different, or at least some different organisms that are a part of one in a savanna. Yeah.
Wait, hyenas eat grass or what?
Hyenas will eat the wild, like the wildebeest.
Why is it grass like running at the hyenas?
Because they do eat grass, I guess.
Oh.
They might be, like, the hyenas are more scavengers. Sometimes they will hunt in packs. But they do, I guess they can eat grass. Yeah, which is cool. So, yeah, a lot of, like, a lot of organisms that don't necessarily, like, aren't necessarily like the apex, like say lions or cheetahs, they'll sometimes have that like duality of being an omnivore, so they can scavenge and eat plants if they need to, or they can also eat like protein, like leftovers. Yeah. So I just wanted to show you like what a food web will like look like. This is a pretty simplified version, as I said before, but you'll probably see this on the AP test if you take it. Something at least like this. So just understand, like, the way that the arrows are facing means that those are like going to be consumed by that organism. So things like rabbits are consumed by cheetahs, or gazelle are consumed by cheetahs, right? Grasses are consumed by gazelles, zebras, and so on and so forth. In reality, there's a lot more connections, but these are just like the direct line of diet. So when we're talking about ecosystem efficiency, our pyramid like setup only assumes 10% ecological efficiency. That's it. Like the rest of the 90% is actually like the rest of it is lost as heat. Yeah. So it's wildly inefficient. Which means that on that pyramid, right? Your producers, they get the most amount of direct energy because they're literally taking it from the sun. Like they're converting it to the energy that they need. And so you see that it says 10,000 joules. Joules is just a measurement of energy. And then if you go to primary consumers, they only get 10% of that 10,000. So they have 1,000 joules. The lions, who are the secondary consumers, get 100, which is because it's 10% of 1,000. So, back to what John was saying, secondary consumers and primary consumers, John and I have to consume more things, right, to reach that energy level that they need. Yeah, because you don't get, like, if we were like all producers, we'd have an excess of energy. But it's also why producers are so important, because they literally are the basis of supporting entire ecosystems. So if they go away, we're all screwed. Pretty much. Like, it's not, like, if those goes away, we're gonna have ecological collapse.
Oh, we're done.
Yeah, it's a pretty, like, we'll be lecturing for more later on, especially when we're talking about the math that we'll have to do. But that being said, are there any questions about anything that we just covered? Yes.
What type of math?
What type of math? Like ecological efficiency, we'll be doing GDP and NNP, so like things that have to do with the energy levels or the like productive levels of an ecosystem. Yeah, it's not gonna be like calc, like you don't have to do calculus. Like the math that you will be doing. Hey, the math that we will be doing will be pretty basic algebra, like moving numbers around, plugging them into equations, like not a lot of like thinking in the math portion, but analyzing is going to be really important. So analyzing those numbers, like seeing what they actually mean. It's not going to be as bad as you think it's going to be. I have a Kahoot set up.